Good day and welcome. We are the Group 4 and I am Israel Janyanan and with me is Marsh Dionel Polvinar and Juan Edward Novella and we will be discussing the economic status including the agrarian situation, Haciendas in the 19th century. Here is the breakdown of our topic. First, the economic background during the 19th century. The disputes due to the economic growth. The economic changes made by Spain. And lastly, the historical values. A brief background before we proceed to the discovery of the Philippine archipelago. On March 16, 1521, Portuguese navigator Ferdinand Magellan, attempting to sail around the world for the Spain, reached the Philippine archipelago, and this expedition would soon come to an end. He was killed by Lapu-Lapu during a tribal skirmish on Mactan Island. Spain received the news, and the arrival of Spanish forces, February 13, 1565. Miguel Lopez de Legazpi set foot into the archipelago with 4 ships and 380 men. On April 27, 1565, Spanish troops invaded the archipelago and attacked the defiant Raja Tupas of Cebu, making him sign an agreement after his defeat and effectively placing the Philippines under Spain, and made Miguel Lopez de Legazpi the first Governor-General of the Philippines to Spain.
So good day guys, my name is Juan Edward Novella from BS Arki 3C, and today I'll be tackling about the economic growth of the Philippines in the 19th century. Flowering of the national movement was hardly possible during the late 19th century without the economic growth which took place in the Philippines in the 19th century, specifically after 1830. This economic growth brought prosperity to the Filipino middle and upper classes, who were in the position who profit by it, as well as the Western shifty British and American merchants who organized it. It also brought into the Philippines both the machinery and consumer goods which the industrialized economies of the West could supply and that Spain could not or would not supply. During the 19th century, the Philippines' economic condition gave rise to Haciendas. Philippines became a major exporter for cash crops and became well known to the world, and by these events, barter system was changed to moneyed economy. So, a brief definition of Haciendas: it is an estate and was most commonly used as a plantation, mines, factories, and mine factories. The figures for the Philippine foreign trade for the beginning, middle, and end of this period are significant of what was happening. The total trade in pesos on year 1825 was 2,800,000. In year 1875, 31,100,000. And in 1895, it is 62 million. The Philippine exports in this flourishing economy were mainly agricultural products, which includes the rice, sugar, and abaca. The places which controlled the production were profited the most places include the Central Luzon, Batangas, Bicol, and Panay and Negros. These include not only the Filipino hacienderos of Pampanga, Batangas, and Western Visayas, and the friar orders owning the large haciendas of Bulacan, Laguna, and Cavite, but also the Equilinos of the friar haciendas. By this time, many of these Equilinos were equivalent hacienderos in their own right, passing on from one generation to the next the lands they returned from the friar hacienda, and farming them by means of their share tenants or kasama. And now we proceed to the economic growth in the mid-19th century. Colonial outpost, the Philippines lacked economic promises for Spain, but it was retained as a colony due to the following reasons. It is a stepping stone to China and Japan. Useful as an outpost of Spanish making an Oriental Empire. The Philippines was relegated to the role of mere missionary and military way station. In a way, these factors were the reason why there were no serious efforts in economic development and that the Philippines' geographic separation to Europe precluded the growth of direct trade islands to be administered by Mexico. The next topic that I will discuss will be disputes on the economic growth. During the 19th century, there is a rising prosperity on the friars' haciendas, which had also brought friction between Eculinos and haciendas as lands grew in value and rents were raised. A combination of traditional methods and modernizing efficiently led to disputes ultimately over who should reap the larger part of the fruits of the economic boom. Eventually, this would lead to a questioning of the friars' rights to the hacienda. So let us have a brief background on the friar lands. The existence of friar lands in the Philippines can be traced back to the early Spanish colonial period when Spanish conquistadors were awarded lands in the form of haciendas for their loyalty to the Spanish crown. Approximately 120 Spaniards were granted either large tracts of land called Sitio de Ganado Mayor or smaller tracts called Caballeros. The hacienderos failed to develop this land due to these reasons. The Spaniards did not expect to permanently stay in the Philippines. Many of them returned to Spain once they were done serving the country. The livestock market this time was still small, thus galleon trade based on Manila appealed more to the Spaniards because it offered better economic opportunities. According to source, Spanish friars were able to acquire land to whatever means available and lands were donated to the friars in exchange for spiritual favors. So many Filipinos believe that the friars had no titles to land they owned them because they acquired them through usurpation. So the next one is the Equilino system. When the export of agricultural crops started to blossom in the 18th century, the Equilino system was put into place. In this system, one who rented land for fixed annual amount, an Equilino, was expected to give personal services to landlords. If he or she fails to do so, he or she will be expelled from the land. The Equilinos could also lease a land they were renting from the landlord to a kasama or sharecropper, who would then be responsible for cultivating the land. The Equilino system functioned as a three-layered system. The landlords at the top, the Equilinos at the middle, and the kasamas at the bottom. And now, let us proceed to the Hacienda de Calamba dispute. It was originally owned by the Spaniards who donated the land to the Jesuit friars to allow them to permanently stay in the Jesuit monastery. However, since the Jesuits were expelled from the Philippines, the haciendas went to the possessions of the Spanish colonial government. In 1803, the land was sold to Don Clemente de Asanza, and after his death, it was eventually sold to the Dominicans who claimed ownership of the hacienda until late 19th century. Rizal's family became one of the principal Equilinos of the hacienda. They rented one of the largest leased parcel of the land measuring approximately 380 hectares. The main crop was sugarcane since it was the most in demand in the world market. Then, the Rizal family got their income mainly from the land they rented. The conflict rose from the continued unreasonable increase of rentals, land confiscations, and other unethical practices of the hacienda management. This caused financial hardships to the tenant and it worsened by the factors of poor harvest because of unfavorable weather and pestilence. The hacienda owners never contributed a single centavo for the town fiesta, education of the children, and even the improvement of their agriculture. Tenants who had spent so much labor in clearing the lands, they were disposed of the said lands for feudal or tax reasons. Thus, high rates of interest were charged for delayed payments of rental, and if the rentals can be paid, the hacienda management will confiscate their carabaos, tools, and even their homes. Rizal's exposure to the problem in Calamba gained him an important material which enriched the sequel of his novel El Filibusterismo. The friar haciendas became the source of oppression, poverty, and peasant discontent that led to armed revolt to challenge the Spanish colonial structures. Rizal knew that the agrarian conflict could ignite a national revolution. So that will be all, and thank you for listening.
Economic changes made by Spain. Agrarian situation during the 19th century. First is the Bandala system. In this system, Filipinos were required or forced to sell their agricultural harvest to the government. This system was implemented to increase funds against other European countries. Next was the new way of land ownership. Spain introduced the idea that a person and his family owns a land. The land was divided among the rich hacienderos, religious orders, and others. Rich landowners can also pass their lands to their heirs. Next was the encomienda. An encomienda is a land ownership system with the use of titulo as proof of ownership. In this system, a Spanish encomendero was granted a number of native laborers who would pay tributes to him in exchange for his protection. There were three types of encomienda that existed: the royal encomiendas, the ecclesiastical encomiendas, and the privado. In 1951, there were 267 encomiendas in the Philippines. The landlords were called encomenderos. They collect taxes or rents from the residents of their land in exchange for protection and education. Next was the tribute. Tribute was a residence tax during Spanish times. Filipinos were compelled to pay tributes or tributo to the colonial government. This was imposed as a sign of Filipinos' loyalty to the King of Spain. Those who pay tributes were individuals between 16 to 60 years of age. Each family pays 1 peso per year. The tribute was replaced in 1884 by the cedula tax. Other payments include gold, chickens, textile, cotton, and rice. Next system was the polo or forced labor. In this system, all male Filipino citizens ranging from 16 to 60 years of age were forced to work for the government for 40 days a year. The polista or workers work for various forms of work such as building, construction, and the like. A polista or worker could get out of work by paying an amount of money or by hiring somebody else to do his polo. Next system was the abolition of slavery. In the 16th century, the Spanish missionaries protested to the king about the keeping of slaves in the Philippines. As a result, a royal decree was made in 1598 to abolish slavery in the country. Next system is the tobacco monopoly. In 1782, the economic program of Spanish Governor General Jose V. Vasco, which was tobacco production, was seized controlled by the Spanish government. Tobacco was planted in Ilocos, Cagayan, and Nueva Ecija. No other product was allowed to be planted there except for tobacco. The Spanish government had total control of the tobacco prices, the amount of tobacco to harvest, and the price to pay to the farmers. The tobacco monopoly lasted for 100 years from 1781 to 1881. Next change was the galleon trade. The galleon trade was also known as the Manila-Acapulco trade. Philippines carried on the galleon trade with Mexico for 2.5 centuries, and and received a subsidy from the Mexican victory. The galleon ships carried spices, porcelain, silk, and other exotic goods that were sold in Mexico. The trip to Mexico lasted for 200 days and the return trade lasted for 20 days. Only individuals with exclusive tickets can participate in this trade. The trade ended in 1815 when Mexico revolted against Spain. Next system was the opening of Suez Canal. The Suez Canal opened on November 17, 1896. It connects Mediterranean and Red Sea, which shortens the distance between Europe and the Orient. The Philippines became closer to Europe and Spain, which encouraged travelers to come to our country. Next, we have the introduction of new plant and animal products. Spanish colonizers introduced new plant and animal products in the Philippines. Plant products include corn, coffee, cacao, beans, etc. And animal products include sheep, cattle, goats, pigeons, etc. Next, we have introduction of new industries. The Spaniards taught the Filipino new methods of farming, cattle ranching, making of candles and soap, and etc. They also constructed stone houses, roads, bridges, and dams. They also introduced how to weave mats and hats. Filipinos began to grow large amounts of sugar, hemp, coconut, and tobacco. Later, these industries became the pillars of the Philippine economy. Next is the Economic Society and the Royal Company. The Economic Society of Friends of the Century was founded in 1781 by Governor General Basco. It was established for the advancement of agriculture in the country. It sent the first shipment of indigo dye to Europe. They also bought birds from China to fight locusts to destroy the crops. They also imported seeds from United States to help the farmers. It stopped its operations on 1890. The Royal Company of the Philippines was founded in 1785 by King Charles III. It was hardly managed and it closed down in 1834. It was established for the promotion of direct trade between Spain and Philippines. King Charles III took advantage of the trade and shipping industries. This was owned by the king, foreign banks, private citizens of Spain, Mexico, Cuba, Philippines, and other Spanish colonies. It was established for the promotion of direct trade between Spain and the Philippines. Next is the Scientific Survey. The first scientific survey of the Philippines was done by Spaniards under the command of Captain Alejandro Malaspina in 1789. Antonio Pineda, a botanist, joined the expedition. Two ships sailed across the archipelago and explored the coast. From this expedition came the first modern shipping chart map of the Philippines. Next is the World Trade and Foreign Investment. Spain opened the Philippines to world trade in 1834. Goods were imported and exported to the Philippines, and this new policy improved the Philippine economy. Goods from other countries could enter the Philippines directly. In the early 19th century, foreign businessmen were allowed to do business in Manila and other places in the country. American and European traders came and opened new businesses in the Philippines. Next is the rise of the banks. Religious orders and rich Spaniards gave loans to businessmen, and the interest was used for charitable works. This was called Obras Pia system. The first Filipino bank was founded at Manila in 1830 by Francisco Rodriguez. Unfortunately, the bank currently no longer exists. Francisco Rodriguez was a Filipino worker who lived in England. The Bank of the Philippine Island, or BPI, was the oldest existing bank in the Philippines. It started as Bangko Espanyol Filipino. Next is the improvement of transportation and communications. Transportation and communication in the Philippines improved greatly in the 19th century. Spain built roads and bridges, lighthouses, the first city tramcar, and the first electric light system. The first telegraph started in 1783, and the first steamships came in 1848. The first postage stamp was issued on February 1, 1854, and the first telephone came in 1890. Next is the social classes. First, we have upper class. The upper class was the richest and most powerful people in the society. They were also called the Ilustrados. They were the former datus and maharlikas. Also include Spaniards, Peninsulares, and the friars. They have the power and authority to rule over the Filipinos. Peninsulares were the Spaniards born in Spain. They held the most important government jobs and made up the smallest number of the population. Next class is the middle class. People that belong into this class include the natives, mestizos, and the criollos. Natives pertain to the pure Filipinos. Mestizos were Filipinos of mixed indigenous Chinese or European ancestry. Criollos were full-blooded Spaniards born in the colonies. Insulares were the term given to Criollos born in the Philippines or the colonies. And the last class, we have the lower class. The lower class includes the workers and the tenant farmers. Heroes from this class include Andres Bonifacio, Emilio Jacinto, and Diego Sila. The lower class includes the Filipinos only. Indios are the poor people who are pure-blooded Filipinos who are ruled by the Spaniards.
Now onto the historical values of the Spanish colonial era. First, despite the colonial Philippines' economic boom, Spain has little to no interest in improving its wealth and natural resources. Secondly, the Spaniards only grew grander as they loot the most from the nation's wealth. Third, rich Filipinos copied their arrogance and aristocratic ways to somehow exert supremacy to their fellow countrymen, especially in those on lower classes. Fourth, there were little to no development under Spain and land ownership, abolition of slavery, new trade and companies, new banks, better roads and bridges, modern electricity, railways and ships, the new middle class and prices and exhibition. The Philippines was only a barrel of resources to Spain. Lastly, the Filipino oppression and enslavement by the Spaniards ignited the spread of a large-scale mutiny. We are the Group 4, and that would be all. Thank you for listening.